Yesterday I was at my local pickleball courts and I saw every player there making the same mistakes on their serve that I've been fixing in my own game for the past 4 years. So I'm going to show you those mistakes and how to fix them so that you can improve way faster than I have and start winning more points. Almost every pickleball player uses the wrong grip on their serve, which means way less power and spin. So because most people tend to hit shots with a continental grip, when they serve they also use the continental grip. But the problem with this grip is that while it's very balanced, it slightly favors the backhand and it doesn't give you an advantage on your forehand. When you're serving, you have a lot of time, so after you hit, you have plenty of time to change your grip. If you want to see instant improvement, then try an Eastern forehand, where you take this knuckle on your index finger and place it on bevel number 3 of the paddle. If you want to be even more extreme, you could try out a semi-Western forehand, where you take that index knuckle and place it on bevel number 4 over here. From the research I've done, I'm pretty confident that Ben uses an Eastern forehand on his serves, even though he uses continental grip everywhere else. So if he's doing it, there's probably a good reason. I've been making this serve mistake for the past 4 years and did not realize it until I started making this video. My backswing is mostly back and then forward, and this is what a lot of people do. And while it does get your hips involved a little bit, it doesn't get them as involved as they possibly could be. So whenever I'm watching the pros, they do this. They go out and then back, and then down and then forward. They have this like looping motion in their serve. And what this does is it allows them to get their hips way more involved and coiled up, and then they can use their hips in the serve. Whereas most people tend to go straight back and then straight forward, and they're relying on their arm to generate the power. The second part to this is that you can get way more power with way less effort by fixing your backswing distance. Most people have huge backswings because that's what they're relying on to generate all of their power. But the problem with this is that you're way less consistent whenever your paddle goes so far behind your body. And whenever you come forward with it, you don't have the full control of your paddle and you might not be making good contact. So instead, you should keep your backswing super short and then rely on your hips to generate all the power. This is what the pros do. And even though their backswing is so short, they're utilizing the rest of their body extremely well, and that's how they can get so much power. There's one more change you can make to have the perfect backswing on your serve. So most people have a really rushed, fast, and out of control backswing. But the problem is when you go super fast, you never give your body enough time to properly load the weight, and so you're leaving a lot of power and control on the table. Instead, in your backswing, you should start really slow and coil up, and then explode super fast. This is just like a golfer who on their backswing goes really slow and then comes forward very explosive, or like you're pulling your rubber band back slow, and then you let it go and it explodes forward. You should do the exact same thing on your serves. This is the most common mistake that I see people making on their serve. Stop calling the score immediately before you serve. If you call the score wrong right before you're about to serve, you're going to be thinking about what you just said instead of the serve that you're about to hit. And you'll see this happen all the time. Someone gets down to serve, they call the score wrong, and then they serve it into the net, and then they correct the score, and they're not even upset that they just lost their serve because they're still thinking about the score. Instead, very simple solution, just call the score, make sure it's right, and then start your pre-serve routine before finally serving. There are very few times you should be using your wrist in pickleball, but the serve is one of them. So most people on the serve, they don't use their wrist at all. Instead, they keep their wrist locked and they hit flat. Or they will use their wrist, but they'll use it in this windshield wiper motion. The problem is that on the serve, we're trying to generate a lot of power and spin, and both of these things prohibit that. So the solution to this is wrist lag. So in your backswing, you want to keep your wrist locked and your arm straight. And then whenever you come forward, your elbow starts to bend and your wrist stays behind. This is called wrist lag. So whenever you get to the front of your motion, your wrist will still be behind, and then you can flick it forward or snap it forward. And now the tip of your paddle is moving incredibly fast, and that's what's going to help you generate a lot more power and a lot more spin. This is a bulletproof way to tell if someone hasn't worked on their serve before. Watch how they follow through. So the mistake here is not being aware of how you're following through, because there are a lot of different ways you can follow through depending on the result that you want. But for right now, I'm going to assume that everyone here is trying to hit heavy topspin serves with a lot of power. If you're going to do this, then you need to be finishing over one of your shoulders. What a lot of people do is they'll finish across their body, and now they're not applying that true topspin, or they'll stop their follow through short and they're not generating enough power. Instead, you want to go from low to high and finish over either your left shoulder or finish over your right shoulder. It's really interesting that a lot of pros will finish their serve over their opposite side shoulder, but when they're hitting their drives, they tend to finish over their same side shoulder. So I don't think that either of these are wrong. I think that both will generate a lot of power and topspin, but you just need to be aware of it and make sure you're doing the same thing every single time. I know this is going to sound crazy, but the best pickleball serves do not hit the center of your paddle. The common mistake here is when you're serving, either hitting too close to the throat or too close to the dead center of your paddle. And now this is wrong for a couple of reasons. If you hit near the throat of your paddle, you're going to get way less power. And also, if you hit near the center, you're going to get decent power, but you're not maximizing your power. So remember, with wrist lag, the tip of the paddle is what's moving the fastest. So whenever you're hitting it, you want to be hitting closer to the tip of the paddle. That way you can capitalize on all that quick movement. If you watch a pro player serve, more often than not, they're hitting the tip of their paddle or even closer to the corner of their paddle, because the ball is not on your paddle for very long whenever you're making contact with it. So you need to already have it in the place where it's moving the fastest. There's a trick that the pros do on their serve that you've probably never noticed. The mistake here is not knowing where to look and when to look there. You probably know that you should be looking at the ball all the way through contact, and yes, you should be, but right before you start your backswing, if you watch the pros, they all look up and look at what their opponent is doing. And the reason this is important is because the serve that you hit might change depending on where your opponent is positioned. So in my last video, I talked about the body serve, and that's a serve where you have to hit a very specific part of the person's body. And if you're not aware of where they're standing, then how can you possibly hit that part of their body? So right before you start your backswing, look up, see where they are, and then from this point on, you only look at the ball. And if they are to move during this time, that's totally fine, because they're not going to have enough time to reposition themselves, and they're going to be moving as they're trying to hit the return, which is not something that you want to do. Where you stand during your serve is super important. So most people don't care about this at all, and they're missing out on a lot of very important advantages. One place you could stand is as close to this line as possible. This way, whenever you serve, your opponents have the least amount of time to react. But you can't hit it with as much power because you're closer, and if you do hit it really hard, then it's likely going to go out. So instead, you could take a couple steps back, and now you can serve it with a lot more power, but your opponent has more time to adjust to the serve that you're hitting. Either one of these has an advantage or a disadvantage, but the important thing is to do the same thing every single time. That way you can adjust your serve accordingly. I would personally advise standing a little bit off of the line whenever you serve, so you can hit with more power, and also after you serve, you're already behind the line and prepared to hit the third shot. If you were to stand directly on the line, whenever you serve, you're going to go into the court, and now you have the chance of the third shot hitting your feet if you don't back up. Additionally, you can serve from the left side of your service box, so that any shot that comes back to you is going to go to your forehand, assuming you're a right-handed player. 90% of people mess up the easiest part of the serve in pickleball. So there are 3 mistakes here: dropping the ball differently every time, tossing it up too far, or dropping it too low. The problem with these 3 mistakes is that you're adding a lot of variance to your serve. So whenever you're dropping the ball differently every time, then you never have a chance to get your swing dialed in, because the ball is always falling in a different location. And the same thing happens whenever you toss the ball up. If your toss isn't the exact same every time, then the rest of your swing is going to be impacted by that. And finally, if you drop the ball low to the ground, then this ball has to go up and over the net, and you're going to have less power than if you just were to hit the ball more flat. So the solution to this is to hold your arm straight out in front of you, probably with your wrist pointing down, and then you can be sure that whenever you finish your swing, you're going to be hitting the ball directly out in front of you, where your swing has the most power and speed, and then you can get the most power and speed on your serve. You can get a lot more power on your serve just by changing how you stand. The common mistake here is putting all of your weight on your front foot, and when you do this, you don't allow yourself to transfer your weight from your back to the front, and that's where a lot of the power actually comes from. So the solution is very simple. No matter if you're in an open stance like this or a closed stance more like this, always start with your weight on your back foot. That way you can load your weight and then explode forward as you serve, generating a lot more power. For any of this to work, you have to have your knees bent even just a little bit. The mistake here that a lot of people make is having their legs completely straight, and this does not allow your hips any room to move, and so you can't generate as much power. So instead, make sure there's a slight bend in your knees, because a lot of the power is coming from the ground, and when you have your knees bent, you can load the weight on your back foot, and you can push off off the ground to generate the power. But if your legs are straight, you don't have that same capability, and so your serve will be less powerful. If you want more content like this, sign up for my newsletter where I give away a free paddle every week, plus a lot of tips just like this. And if you made it this far in the video, please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.